Hello and welcome to International Affairs, broadcasting live from Dhaka's Gulshan studio. Of course, today is the 30th November, is the last day of the month. So this shall be a very interesting program. Before I bring up the topics for discussion, I want to introduce who I have with me in the studio as well on Zoom. In the studio, we have Sir John Charles Dalton, who will join us as international consultant and has commentated on various issues across the globe here in this very studio. And of course, we have Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes joining us from Washington, D.C. He's, of course, SATV's geopolitical correspondent who has been continuously supporting this program from day one. I want to begin in the studio with John Dalton. We know that in the United States there has been a shooting of a National Guard troop who was actually deployed to keep the peace in the various cities as we know it. And this time around, an Afghan national had taken an attempt openly and had taken the life of the National Guard. I know that this has prompted U.S. President Donald Trump in order to have a stricter immigration rule and not allowing those who wanting to immigrate to the United States from, as he said, third world nations, or in other words, developing nations. I want to understand how you felt about this recent issue that has taken place.
Well, you feel sad for the young woman from West Virginia who was deployed as a National Guard. There's a serious question about whether that deployment was legal or not, or whether Trump exceeded his authority by mobilizing the National Guard and bringing him into Washington, D.C. in the first place. So she may have been, unfortunately, in the wrong place at the wrong time. As also was the Afghan refugee who had been properly vetted. He was a translator for the CIA in Afghanistan, as I understand it. How he managed to get a weapon in the United States is beyond me, but apparently he managed to do that. I would wait to see when the dust settles what the whole story is, how this works. But the response, the sort of the collective guilt response from one miscreant, the Afghan perpetrator, to say that everybody from the developing world is going to be excluded from the United States, may be a bit extreme, don't you think? And unjustified until we know a lot more facts about this individual person, what his circumstances were. We do know that the guardsman and the woman and the guy who was with her were unarmed, and it has been called a targeted shooting. I mean, he was actually has been found to have been going after them directly as opposed to some chance encounter on the street. So, A, I think it's a sad state of affairs. B, it should never have happened if Trump had not exceeded his authority. And C, I don't believe in collective responsibility and collective guilt. But it's going to happen many times in many places unless they sort of get this whole idea correct about troops being deployed in American cities. It's against the law, and I think it's just an unfortunate conflict of ideas coming to fruition, and one young woman lost her life as account of it.
Thank you, of course, John Dalton, for your understanding of what the situation is. I know that this is just one of the incidences. There are multiple incidences in the past regarding this gun violence, and as your question, where this Afghan national had attained this gun, it is a matter of mystery.
Exactly. I mean, I'm sure he would not have qualified. He's just to walk in and buy a gun at a gun show or to buy a shop. So he may well have had it with him in a shipment from Afghanistan. We don't know. That's what I said. Let's wait until all the facts are known before we jump to too many conclusions about him and the young woman. It's a serious, it's one incident, but it may well be the sort of the harbinger of more to come. And I think that's unfortunate that these National Guardsmen that are being deployed have now become a target of attack by both Americans as well as by foreigners. I mean, it's an overuse of authority, in my opinion. More, others may differ, but I think that it all comes back to the initial decision. You can't escape the fact that this was held by the courts to be an illegal deployment in Los Angeles, for example, and in Portland, Oregon. It probably is illegal in Washington, D.C., but it's just muscle flexing by the president who's exceeding his authority, but he wants to show he's a tough guy. So we're stuck with one poor young lady dead.
Thank you for your observation. I want to come to Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes, where this incident had happened in Washington, D.C. My question to you, as you were hearing John Dalton in the studio, and how about this shooting that has happened, it has prompted the American administration to review countries of concern regarding green card applications. I want to understand how you felt about this recent issue, and of course, my condolences to the families of those who have been lost serving the nation. I want to understand how Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes feels about this issue.
Greetings from Washington, D.C. This Sunday morning. This incident in Washington is a very traumatizing event for the fact that that area, Farragut West subway station, is a very populated area. These two servicemen was ambushed. Unfortunately, the young lady lost her life. She actually volunteered to work that day. She wasn't supposed to work, to allow other people to be with their families during the holiday. She was a 20-year-old. The other gentleman, he's fighting for his life right now with brain injuries. And this event has prompted the United States administration to basically put a hold on all foreign immigration process, and particularly third world, particularly the global South coming in the United States. So this is going to have a profound effect on our immigration process as we move forward. Yes, the 20th of November, the courts ruled that it was illegal for the troops to be in D.C., but this incident now prompted the administration to push for additional troops. We have over 2,000 troops in D.C. We're looking at now 2,500. So one viewpoint is, okay, we got more troops in, and the other viewpoint is now we got 2,500 more targets to be attacked in the city. It's not being viewed right now. It's very positive right now. Everybody's on edge about the killings, and the more on edge about the response. The response is foreigners are not allowed in the country. They want to use this situation to promote the immigration and additional tactics that's going to be coming on in regarding to getting undesirables out. That is to be determined. So we right now waiting to see exactly what happened with this situation. But right now, it is being used by the current administration as a reason not to allow people in.
Thanking Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes for his take on this matter. I want to talk about the person who was involved for the shooting. He's identified as Ramanullah Kanwal, a 29-year Afghan national who had previously worked with the U.S. forces in Afghanistan, and he came to the U.S. under a program known as Operation Allies Welcome way back in 2021. So it wasn't just someone, a rogue shooter, or it wasn't someone who came for economic aspirations in the United States. It was a part of an operation known as Allies Welcome. So I want to have a question to John Dalton. You see, it was a part of a greater operation, that his involvement in U.S. land. And of course, we know that in various states, the National Guard has been deployed. Exactly what are the roles of community policing? I'll give you an example before I go to a question. You see, Zoran Mamdani's New York. Over there, he had made sure of Commissioner Tisch to be the leader of the NYPD, and had said that the NYPD is going to do its level best to keep all the boroughs in New York safe and protected, hence not requiring the National Guard. But in this case, we see someone who had worked for the U.S. operations in Afghanistan coming out and shooting a National Guard member. I just want to understand how it connects up with the relationship with third world nations.
Well, you know, the United States was in Afghanistan for quite a long period of time. During that period of time, many Afghanis were deployed and hired by different branches of the U.S. government to assist them. They were translators, they were assistants, they worked side by side. Huh? They knew that when the Taliban came in, they were at risk. And so the United States, as a gesture of goodwill, and this was supported by many, many of the military people who had worked with these individuals in Afghanistan, they set up a situation so that they would be allowed into the United States. I think the number is even so high as like 100,000, but I've lost track of that. But maybe Norman knows. But it's a huge number of Afghans who were rescued from the Taliban, brought to the United States. It was a very legitimate humanitarian gesture for people who had been our allies on the ground. And now we have one of those individuals who, for whatever reason, flipped. But the initial intent, and the fact is, like, if we get to the point where the review of all of the green cards, review of all of the people who came in from starting in 2021, if those people are forced to return to Afghanistan, their lives are at risk. And so there has to be a balanced understanding and approach to this whole vetting process. They were vetted, they were approved by the Trump administration as well. I mean, Donald Trump would love to blame Joe Biden for this. You know, a noun, a verb, and Joe Biden is a solution for every kind of problem he has. But, you know, we have done this in the past with people who have been our allies in situations where we don't understand the culture. Why were they in the first place? We don't speak the language. Why were they there in the first place? And so these people who are brought into the United States under special cover sometimes do not acclimate themselves properly to the United States situation that they're in. He may have been in a higher position because he was a translator for the CIA in Afghanistan. He gets to the United States and he's just some guy. Can't get a job, maybe, who knows? So I think let's wait to find out a lot more about this fellow and what his motivation was and why he did this. And he may have been like a one-off kind of guy and not like this, all Afghanis are bad, so we have to send them back.
But that's definitely the stance of Donald Trump, and it's not only Afghanis; it's almost every third world nation.
That's his. You know, he's a simplistic. His solutions are always over the top and highly simplistic. Analysis is not one of his strong points. As I said, let's go back, and as Norman and I have both said, we feel bad for that young woman who was in harm's way. She was deployed to do a job which many people feel is totally unnecessary, and yet. You know, the reaction is not to say, let's examine our deployment mission. They're looking at, let's look at all of the people who were involved in the crime side, and we'll deport them all. All the third world people, we want to get them out. So, you know, at some point in time in today's shows, I want to talk about bullying. At some point, because that is a thread that from all of the stories we're talking about, there is a bully at the center of it. So, again, I send my condolences, as you do, to the family of that poor young woman, 22 years old, 23 years old. I mean, just a kid starting out.
Yeah.
20 years old.
20 years
Just 20?
Just a teenager, if you would call it.
That's...
Yes, 20.
That's totally sad to think about that. You know, I have a daughter, too, older than that, but her family must be heartbroken that she was trying to do the right thing and was in the National Guard, and now the consequences are this because she came in face-to-face with random situation.
And she did not know she'd be facing death so quick.
Who does?
Who does? No one knows. I want to have a last question before I go on to break to Norman Flood Barnes. I know this young lady has been killed. I want to ask a question that I really must ask and let our viewers know as well. What are the responsibilities for the current administration in regards to the person or the lady that lost her life? Is there any kind of support for her family that the government would want to expedite in the coming days? I want to ask this to Norman Flood Barnes in Washington, D.C.
She was at the time, a government employee. There's benefits and provisions made for military personnel in regards to her family. Question was brought up her funeral situation. Will the current president attend? His response was silence. We don't know yet. The vice president and other parties have currently visited the young man, Mr. Wolf, in the hospital, who's struggling for his life right now. But right now, the government is in the position to provide support and benefits for the two service persons. One, for a funeral, unfortunately, for the young lady's demise, and the other one is he has a healthcare issues is going to be if he survived, will be uh, probably lifetime. He's in a terrible situation. Uh, his brain is swelling right now. They're trying to get him stabilized, but he has a challenge. So we're still praying for both parties, the families of both, and the gentleman. Hopefully, he can survive this. But right now, the government can and hopefully will come in and help out with the family.
Thanking Norman Floyd Barnes for his take on regarding how the administration will react to this crime, I would call it. I still have a couple moments left before I go on to a break. I want to have a question. I know that when a crime happens, of course, there is legal proceedings, legislation that says that when you commit such a crime, these are the punishments a judge can warrant you. So, of course, here it is attempted murder and then, of course, murder as well. In both cases, I want to understand what are the legal challenges here, and will there ever be a chance of some kind of capital punishment happening, especially because a serviceman of the country had passed away in this incident?
Well, I'm sure people would think that way, that they would look for revenge.
And it happened on Thanksgiving weekend.
Yeah, they look for revenge. You have to, before we ever get to that point about the mandatory sentences on a murder case, he has to be charged. Has to be a full investigation. His situation as a green card holder as opposed to a citizen is different. He can, in fact, be tried in the United States as a criminal.
Yes.
But whether or not, and I don't even know what the law is in, forgive me, but I don't know what the law is in the District of Columbia regarding capital punishment. So we have a long way to go before we get to there. I'm waiting to hear a statement from this man. What was his motivation? Why did he do this? Was he upset with the United States and this was a symbol of the United States that he was attacking? I mean, he had shown good service while he was in Afghanistan. What made him flip on that day in that situation? Where did he get a gun? Why did he feel justified to take it out on these two strangers? I want to know that before I make too many assertions about this man. I don't know enough about him or what motivated him. Clearly it's a crime. What's the motivation?
Of course, this is quite so important. I will come back to this issue, ladies and gentlemen. There are much more issues that I will be discussing, but production team has instructed me to go for a short commercial break. Do stay with us.
Pleasant view of Rangpur. 5-star facilities, Reed Chain Hotel, Grand Palace. Relax in spacious rooms and suites. Enjoy local and international cuisines. Banquet and conference room. Helipad. Gymnasium. Beauty salon. Restaurants and bar. Cafe lounge. Experience luxury at Grand Palace, Rangpur.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to International Affairs. In the studio, we have John Charles Dalton as well as an Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes, who joins us through Zoom. I want to change the topic of this segment regarding the Venezuela and United States of America tensions. Over the weekend, U.S. President Donald Trump had said that the airspace above Venezuela should be shut off, given regards to the fact that they are taking part in various narco-trafficking activities. Of course, the Venezuelan side had strongly condemned the move, calling it a violation of its sovereignty. Several major airlines reportedly canceled flights to Venezuela following this closure order. I want to begin with John Dalton in the studio. I know that the power projection between the two sides have been ongoing. It's not an issue that had started just on this weekend. It is a longer issue over several weeks now. As I understand it, the U.S. military aircraft carrier, the biggest in its fleet, the Gerald Ford, has been appointed to the Caribbean in an understanding that there may be a fight between Venezuela and the United States of America. During the break, you were passing me some of the comments. Would you please kindly share?
Yeah, well, on this situation with
Yes.
Venezuela, yeah, I think, don't forget, it's all about the oil. You take all the other stuff aside, this is about the oil in Venezuela and how it can be protected and accessed by American companies that may be simply not available to have access under the current regime. As I said, when Hugo Chavez was there, of course, he was a strong man. I don't think Trump would have dared confront him. But it's asynchronous, kind of asymmetry, certainly. United States against Venezuela. I mean, the only time that makes any sense is soccer. I mean, come on, there's no way that there's an equal equation there at all. But most people now in the United States and in the United States Senate particularly are calling out the fact that these are illegal operations. These are unconstitutional expression of American power, that there's no act of war been declared. And as a consequence, bombing all of those boats is highly suspicious. It's like a rogue action, not usually associated with the United States. One of the things that was interesting to me was that there apparently were two survivors, one from Uruguay and one from Colombia. Now, if they were criminals, why did the United States return them to their country of origin? Why were they not prosecuted as criminal drug traffickers, arrested and brought to trial? But instead they were like, okay, we're going to send you back home. So something was clear that they were not guilty enough, they were not dead enough. I don't know. But the fact of the matter was there's some mysterious questions about whether or not the United States had proper jurisdiction in that situation.
Thank you for the observation. I understand that these drug boats were in international waters. The international water guideline is every nation has a 25-kilometer boundary on its waters, and apart from that, it is now then international waters, and it belongs to almost everyone in the open world. I want to come to Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes. As you were hearing John Dalton talking about this offensive and counter-offensive by the two sides, Venezuela and USA, it's not an official war. And that is not the language of the tabloids, if not all the other big media houses. But the tensions remain escalatory, and multiple countries, including the UK, has issued a statement saying that these attacks on foreign boats by the United States of America may be breaking some international laws. I want to understand how Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes feels about this latest tensions.
Thank you for the question. In essence, the attacks on these boats in international waters are considered illegal. That's my honest response to that. They're basically not justifiable. The contrast of these two surviving terrorists, narco terrorists, returned to their home also gives a question about why weren't they questioned, why weren't they apprehended, brought to justice. They were sent back home. One can suggest that they were sent home to keep them quiet, to not discuss the fact, what's going on, and basically to allow the U.S. to continue on this open water attacks on the ships. So there's a lot to be viewed on this. We have to just watch the details and has things going on. but this doesn't feel right. Something is wrong here. It's being utilized as basically, as John mentioned, we get into being who's the big bad bully, being bullied again. The United States against Venezuela, create an environment where they feel pressured. Uh, the goal is to get influence and impact on the oil-rich country of Venezuela. So that is what we're looking at right now. Our military has been used as pawns once again, just like the unfortunate situation with the National Guard in Washington, D.C. They've been used as pawns for the current administration agenda.
Thanking Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes. I understand that this time around, this year, beginning of this year, Jan 10th, Nicolas Maduro was sworn in as the president for his third term, which the results of this election the U.S. rejected. This is way back in January.
Yep.
And then in October, U.S. Administration had authorized the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, to carry out operations in Venezuela. And as Norman was saying, the oil-rich nation of Venezuela, I want to understand the intent of the United States of America, especially as Venezuela is an oil-rich nation. It exports oil as well as Iran. In similar context, Russia. These are countries that are heavy on exporting of its oil to maintain its economies. I want to understand, is there other intent than narco-trafficking for the United States?
Well, I believe so. I mean, I think that if you look at who's helping Venezuela with their oil production, from a drilling point of view, exploration, drilling, production, shipping, it's China. And so China has been a very large ally, become an ally of Venezuela in this whole oil domain. And so I'm sure that makes Donald Trump a bit nervous about that. They're right there in our own Western Hemisphere. And I'm sure that the major oil companies, which have ponied up a whole bunch of money to get him elected, whispering in his ear that, look, we're not capitalizing on this situation in Venezuela with all of the oil that's there. We're giving up our strategic advantage in the world because China's benefiting from this oil-rich country. And so there's that geopolitical component as well. It's got nothing to do with the conflict and the drugs per se, in my view. I mean, there's always follow the money. It's always a good example, a good thing to think about when Trump is involved, follow the money. So I think that there's at least that's part of the equation. Clearly, we're opposed to drugs and drug trafficking, and it's coming from Colombia and it's coming from Venezuela and other places as well. So that is part of what we're looking at and part of what we're trying to protect against. But maybe in this situation, immigration and drug trafficking is just sort of a beard, a cover for the true intent of the government to try to make sure that China does not get too much of a foothold in South America and for the development and export of oil.
Thank you for your answer, but it opens up an entire new debate when it involves China. We know the Chinese game plan is quite so strict, and it's not just Venezuela's aspirations in China and vice versa. In the world media, we know how China and Japan are countering one another, and we know Japan's an ally of the United States. Once again, this geopolitical tension between these territories are, of course, of importance. I want to change the segment as we speak, and I want to go to Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes regarding Ukraine and Russia. We must talk about this issue. As
That's still involved? They're still involved?
They're still involved.
Oh, okay.
And even after this 19-point plan that has been proposed, there has been fighting, overnight strikes by Russian forces on and around Kyiv, at least killed 6 people and wounded dozens, while Ukrainian forces struck 2 Russian-linked oil tankers in the Black Sea, part of what is known as Russia's shadow fleet, used to circumvent sanctions. So this is the latest that we have. I want to understand from Norman Floyd Barnes' perspective, these 19 points issued by the United States government is in favor to some extent towards the Russian side, and Ukraine fears losing out on the 35 to 30% territory that it had been lost to Russia. I want to ask Norman Floyd Barnes how he feels about these latest incursions between the two sides.
Thank you again. Quick response. My response to that is this is a hot mess. We went from 28 points down to 19 down to 3 points, but it's still the same problem. Territory, security, NATO. These are the sticking points that is haven't been resolved. They unresolved, and it's going to cause problems currently, in the future, and maybe forever. I don't think we're going to find a solution to this. Russia wants to continue with this campaign. They are proving it by continuing their attacks, drones, military rockets, military. They are hell bent on continuing their campaign, while they're waiting for Ukraine to respond to uh, a plan for their surrender. Basically, so they're proposing to them, these are the terms of surrender, and you have to take it. On the other side, Ukraine is looking at, do we continue to fight, or do we risk the possibility of losing aid from the West, the United States? Do we deal with that? Uh, it's not going to be something easy. Giving up and submitting to the Russians' demand, the Russian/U.S. 19-point plan creates additional problems for Europe. Europe is watching this whole situation. The question about NATO without the United States is now being viewed as a result of this 28 19-point plan. They are now evaluating the relationship with the United States in regards to our response to this Ukraine Russian issue. So this is not going away. Either way it turns, it's going to affect the relationship with the United States and Europe.
Thanking Norman Flood Barnes. Due to time restrictions, I want to ask you another question regarding the same issue. I understand that a top aide and negotiator was dismissed from the political climate in Ukraine, and his house and if not office was being raided by anti-corruption officials. I want to get a take from Norman Flood Barnes. I know that this Ukraine-Russia war has been running for more than 3.5 years. And finally, we are seeing some kind of faltering of allegiance between those who support Volodymyr Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine. I just want to understand how you see this, as, of course, Ukraine is on the side that is losing out the most.
Yes, as we discussed in dealing with the situation with Ukraine and Russia and Europe, Ukraine has its own issue. They have an internal, like a mini revolution in their country regarding how they want to move forward. Some wants to move forward. Some wants to move forward with this acceptance agreement. Others do not. Unfortunately, this key negotiator is being sacrificed. Had to resign, part of a corruption probe in terms of how things are going to move forward. So it's a lot of stuff going on inside of Ukraine in addition to the war. Winter is coming. People want to end this thing, but how they end it is going to be largely dependent on what position, what guarantees they can get regarding security and future aggression, and basically how NATO is going to respond. Because right now, the United States is viewed as pro-Russia in this agreement, and NATO and the Europeans are looking at how do we recover after this situation is being resolved. So it's a lot going on. It's not going to be, the ceasefire, the ending is not, it's going to start a whole new dynamics, a whole new narrative, what's going on. So the bigger picture is how Europe is going to deal with this decision, whatever it may be. Do they continue the war, let the war continue, lose U.S. aid, or do we concede to the current plan and risk additional response from Russia over Europe? And what is the position of the United States? Are the United States going to support us, or are they going to fade back and do something else? The opinion is that the United States is coming weaker in terms of Europe and NATO.
Thanking once again Ambassador Norman Floyd Barnes on his observations regarding these latest developments regarding United States and of course Ukraine and Russia. I want to come back to John Dalton in the studio. I know you were hearing Norman breaking down these latest issues between Ukraine and Russia. And from according to multiple media outlets, we know that a Ukrainian negotiation team is going to United States of America to understand much more regarding this deal. And of course, if the Ukrainian side were to accept this 19-point plan, there must be some kind of guarantee from the United States of America for so that in future Russia does not invade Ukraine once again. I want to ask a question to you, sir. How do you see this unfolding as this war is being so long, is being prolonged for such a long time that even the United States president has to take a drastic action to understand how to stop this war?
Yeah, well, I think that surprisingly to me, that the meeting that was held in Geneva with Marco Rubio and the Ukrainians made some progress on modifying the 28-point plan into something which was more palatable. I mean, 19, as Norman has indicated, it's really down to 3 key issues, but that's okay. Let's take the 19 points that are going to be in the plan. It sort of reads like an obituary for Ukraine. It's like I don't see how they can really accept any of the territorial concessions that they're being asked to make. I think on the positive side, if I can just take a little bit of a turn here. On the positive side, in the EU and in NATO, the leaders there are sick of Putin in the extreme. They point out that Russia's economy is now smaller than Texas's economy. It's 1/10 the size of California's economy. That they have been crippling themselves economically by pursuing this war. And that maybe they just, maybe Putin is just simply punching above his weight. That he no longer has as much, that's why so much of what you see happening now are drones.
Yes.
And less so battles on the ground. They've lost hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million people on this charade. Bangladeshis are there, Koreans are there, other people are there on the front line because they don't have enough men to go to war, to fight these battles. And the Russian population has always been aging with a huge outmigration of youth. So I agree with Norman, this is going to go on and on no matter what happens. But I'm happy to see that Europeans and NATO are standing up to this bully, Putin, this little penguin who walks around like he's such a big deal. I think we're getting sick and tired of bullies generally. Netanyahu, Trump, Viktor Orban, Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un. I think the world is reaching a point of like, who the hell do these guys think they are?
A group of bullies.
They're bullies, and they're simply forcing their bullying tactics to sort of try to get people to bend the knee. And I think I've seen the European, the head of NATO, I've seen the foreign minister of Poland stand up to Putin and say, don't try it, brother. Don't try. Don't send any more planes and drones over our territory. You will suffer the consequences. I think people are seeing, the closer they get to pulling back the curtain on the Wizard of Oz, they realize this guy doesn't have all the power that he thinks he has. I'm talking about Putin.
Right.
And so I hope that they stand up to the bully. I hope that they reach an accommodation on Russia and Ukraine. But I'm dubious, of course, because I don't think that Russia is ever going to give up their claim to the Donbass, which is heavily Russian or ethnically, and which has been included in Ukraine way back when the Soviet Union drew the boundaries. But everybody who lives there is Russian ethnically.
Right.
So Donetsk and Luhansk, they're basically Russian.
These are all eastern flank territories.
That's on the
and
eastern
the people
border.
there support Russia more than they support Ukraine.
They're ethnically Russian,
Exactly.
And so it's very hard, of course you can claim sovereignty and decide that, no, we don't want to give up any of our own land. But, I mean, there's not a single person there who would vote for Zelensky in an election. I mean, they're clearly pro-Russian. They live a Russian lifestyle. I don't know, maybe there comes a point in time where you say, okay, well, let's just let's just say that these belong there and we're not going to fight for it anymore, but we are not going to give up Zaporizhia or other parts on the flank that's on this side of the Dnieper River. I don't know, but we have to, it's going to go on and on and on because hate just simply cannot be accommodated.
I really wonder what kind of negotiations the two sides are going to face, especially as you've broken it down. One of the latest incursions by Russia's drone entering European airspace include Moldova. A large Russian strike campaign against Ukraine is also happening. And of course, Moldovan authorities had said it is citing serious threats to its civilian safety because of such incursions. I want to thank John Charles Dalton regarding commenting on this fact. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for another break. However, after the break, there are more issues that I shall be discussing. Do stay with us.
Luxury in Dhaka.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to International Affairs, broadcasting live from Dhaka studio. And of course, we have John Charles Dalton in the studio, and I want to ask him this following question. I understand that over at least 500 people have been killed in Southeast Asia. This is, of course, due to torrential rains which have flooded southern Thailand, and it continues to various locations. It has displaced thousands, prompting airlifts and emergency responses. And it's not just Thailand, ladies and gentlemen. It is, of course, the island nation of Sri Lanka. I understand that these torrential rains are disrupting people's daily lives. I want to ask John Dalton how he felt about it. Of course, during the break, we were theorizing how we were going to break down this topic for our viewers. I want to understand how you felt as the loss of life seems to be climbing.
Yeah, I think that, I think that what we talked about, and that's interesting, people do not make the absolute connection between climate change and natural disaster. They see the disaster, they respond to it as an event, they provide some immediate support, they send some rice, they send some boats, they do whatever they have to do, people die, and then they don't say that, oh yeah, this could have been prevented had we done this. Had the mangrove forests been more protective and we kept them from being cut down. Had, I lived in Sri Lanka and I lived in Thailand, and in both of those situations, I've lived through torrential rains. But since that time, forests have been decimated, canals have not been lined properly, and overpopulation, people have moved too close to the river systems and the clogs because of poverty. That's the worst land you can build on. And as a consequence, the destruction is greatest upon the poorest among us because they do not have the ability and the resilience to adapt and mitigate the problem. So that's the same situation we have here. You know, we're probably not going to have as much of a disaster, but if you look all of the riverbanks that are eroding, and yet there are shacks built along that border, they will just fall into the river. And unless we simply begin to see that, okay, we need a solution that prevents people from putting themselves in harm's way, while we simultaneously deal with the causes of the problem, which is climate change, CO2 production, you know, too much agriculture, which people don't like to talk about. But, you know, cattle and rice produce as much CO2 as many of the factories in the world. So we have to change behavior. Without a change in behavior, without a change in attitude, without government intervention to force people to move away from the riverbanks, we're always going to have these disasters.
That was a lovely overview of disasters in general, of natural calamities. I want to understand how it differs from disasters that are man-made. Some of those that have taken to the big screens over the last 1 week, we've seen a tower of 6 tower buildings in Hong Kong just grazed down by a fire that could not be stopped. I believe that is one of those man-made disasters which could have easily been avoided if they had enough precautions. And the authorities come back to use this very language that this or so many people is unaccounted for.
Yep.
Of course, the death toll is on the rise, and the language of the media that has described this event and how it differs from a climate change, which are natural disasters. I want to understand human-made disasters are also some kind of has some kind of significance. I want your take regarding this Hong Kong fire across the 6 blocks.
Well, those kind of fires typically are because of the failure to implement the regulations that are necessary to control. You have the materials that are used are not fire resistant. There are not enough alarms that go off. Those typical things happen. You go back and you trace it back. It's a lack of regulation, lack of control. You'll forgive me for saying we know that here, for example, in Bangladesh, because of Rajuk and the way Rajuk sort of like waves the rules. You know, as they say, England rules the waves, Bangladesh waves the rules. Things get built here that should not be built. Things are not designed to be earthquake-proof. And there's always a wink-wink involved where the companies are using building materials that are less than what they specify when they start the construction. So these man-made, these sort of natural disasters are one side of it. The man-made disasters typically come about because of, I would say, many times, because of greed, lack of enforcement, and failure of the government to properly regulate behavior of the construction industry and of the real estate industry in situations where they could intervene.
Of course, and I must thank you for bringing up this recent issue of you mentioning how the issues over here in Bangladesh are being held. From my journalistic experience, I understand that if you were to develop your own building in Bangladesh and if you were to submit a plan that specifies how big your building is, recent times we've seen that based on the square feet design, it is just a design, it's just a plan. The building has not been made. Even if it was a plan, there had to be some kind of monetary exchange between the two parties, given the details of the plan. Mind you and our viewers, that is just a plan. It is not a building that has been made. Of course, these local issues do have some kind of importance on an international scale, but I want to come back to climate change. A topic that has taken toll across the globe. I mean, this year we've seen floods in Texas that has wiped out a girls' camp. Over 100 students, 100 girls have died. That is just one of the implications. And, you know, Democrats were saying that the current administration did not have enough kind of protection, or after the event, they did not do much for the Texan people. And coming back to our Southeast Asia, we see these cyclonic systems developing in the Bay of Bengal, both affecting Thailand and affecting Sri Lanka. This year around, Bangladesh was spared because no active cyclones had made landfall in Bangladesh. And of course, one cannot ignore the climate summit that had happened, the COP30 that had happened in Belém, Brazil. And in the next year, it's going to be held in Turkey, COP31. So the understanding is that once a natural calamity or a disaster takes place, what are the responsibility of the authorities, if not of the various governments that work together to understand these changes? I want your comment before I can conclude on our program today.
Well, you know, everybody's been talking about that 1.5 degrees increase in the temperature
Yes.
climate, and it's already gone beyond that. And now they're recalibrating and saying, well, maybe it can be 2.6. You know, we're okay. You know, I think that if you look at it, the global warming affects the temperature of the ocean, and the temperature of the ocean, when it's warm, produces much more aggressive hurricanes, cyclones, and the like. You also have the situation where, and I don't know that, I'm not a scientist, but I'm looking at all these earthquakes that are happening in Asia and Southeast Asia as being part of the problem of groundwater extrusion. That even though it's way down below this, messing with the fault lines has proven to be sort of a risk as well. But as I said, you cannot deal with this problem without behavior change, because the momentum of the climate change is just simply so extreme. Even if it increases by just 1 degree, okay, that will simply add a burden to the people who are in the situation now, who are barely hanging on against the climate change itself. You go down south on the rivers and you look at what's happening, and people are building over and over and over again right next to the river bank. And yet through siltation, the banks are washing away. So Bangladesh has a major challenge on its hand, both in the urban areas, which are overpopulated. We're now the second largest city. Dhaka is the second largest, most populous city in the world.
Following Tokyo, if I'm not wrong.
But Mexico City or Tokyo, one of those all usual suspects. But you know, we feel it. I mean, you know, you just go outside and you can see that there's the river, all the rivers, the beautiful rivers of Bangladesh, which was a gift from God, to have such amazing water resources, are polluted, are ruined. Okay, and people are dumping trash into the river. It's everybody's common sewer. And so this lack of concern and understanding of the interconnection between all of the individual pieces in the environment and the population.
Right.
You know, it's like, yeah, that's a big problem, but I got to go have a coffee. That's what happens.
I want to thank Joel Daltrell for his observations regarding various topics, especially climate change and its relevance to Bangladesh. Ladies and gentlemen, this is, of course, International Affairs. As I draw closer for today, is 30th November. It is, of course, known as National Computer Security Day, a day to raise awareness about cybersecurity. And of course, this 30th November is a day for remembrance of all victims of chemical warfare, and International Day of observance of those who lost their lives due to chemical warfare. Ladies and gentlemen, I shall be coming back tomorrow on International Affairs. Do stay tuned and watch the following programs on SATV.